All right. Well, welcome one and all. Thank you for joining the Kansas Green Party recording of a enduring topic that's been going on forever. You'll see that this started in the 1940s up through the 1980s when the site up in these areas and north of here, by the way, was declared a Superfund national priority list site for cleanup and mitigation. But that allowed a lot of years in which the migration of those plumes, if you can see my marker here, to occur in groundwater. And you can see that this entire area from these rail lines has been declared a high-risk zone or a national priority to pump groundwater in these regions. And what I'm going to propose is how to clean this up, utilizing resources from the community itself that has been inundated and suffered for a generation in these regions. And I'll go back in a little history. We know people who are old enough that can remember that the 21st Street right in here was a refinery. The Derby refinery operated for decades in this region. There was a shanty town right here, right in here. It was literally in the shadow of the thermofor catalytic cracker of that refinery. That it did not have services, did not have sewerage, water, or electricity in here. It was just a shanty. Well, it's gone today. But what has remained is the subsurface soil and water contamination, which in this area of the star is around 14 feet from the surface to the groundwater aquifers. And I thought I'd just throw this in. This is the symbol of the Kansas Green Party. Have here in Kansas that we try to emphasize. And we work very closely with other environmental groups, namely the Sierra Club, that is very concerned over these issues of just the contamination. What we want to establish is a neighborhood resilience and sustainable living for these areas. Through electrification, urban infill, low and ultra low emission zones. That is, we don't want any more air quality problems, water quality problems, and we don't want to be a food desert. And it preserves a cultural legacy. Even though these neighborhoods are underserved, deprived, and so forth, it still retains a sense of community. That's where people were born, grew up, and went to school. And so here on the right is a good symbol, I think, of what we're trying to refer to. A renaissance, if you will, Carla, thank you, of an area in which we can be sustainable and have a cultural identity at the same time. Now, in the 1980, here's the site of the Johns Sludge Pond. Here is a fishing lake. And these are the rail lines now that KDHE, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, claims that there was a toxic spill of trichloroethylene right in here. We don't know how it occurred. We don't know when it occurred or how long it's actually been there. But I suspect that is just a kind of a screen to start pumping and make people think this is the latest kind of thing to pump and treat the groundwater. Well, I think it's been up there a long time. It certainly has been north of here at 57th and Street. That's another Superfund site. This was the site of the Superfund number 318. When it was first brought to light in 1980, I looked up the various analyses of this. It would rain on these this is a 2-acre site, sludge pond, a pH of 1, contained an array of volatile organic carbons, some of the alkanes, and aromatics, solvents. But again, I'll say with a pH of 1, that's about the same acidity as the water in a car battery. And because of that, the PCBs that were dumped in here would have gone in solution to that groundwater. And it's been told to me by the reliable sources that this had caught fire more than once, and actually was a site. So when that happens, PCBs are converted to something called a polychlorinated furan. And I did some analysis still around. I took some samples from here and actually found colorimetric tubes and a sampling train, just slightly heated PCBs were indeed present in that sludge. Representative Carr told me they used to go and wade in this sludge, which I imagine their moms are pretty disgusted with them for that, and were able to get that on their shoes and so forth. But they would play there. There was no fence, no warning signs, completely accessible by a dirt road, back road here, and it was actually placed there by a re-refiner. He would take waste material from various industries and try to make it into a reusable product.
Can I ask a question, Kent?
Sure.
We drive by there almost every day, and there's people in that pond commonly.
Oh, right in here, Cruise Lake, they
Right
call it, or the K96 Lake.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Down in here, just a few yards, a few hundred feet maybe, was the John Sledge Pond. And the next slide shows you the sampling wells and sampling points for monitoring wells for that site. And you can see they're not located in the groundwater. They don't have to go very deep. They're not very far from this site. And you can see that there is a well, waters taken from this lake, either Cruiser Lake or the K96 Lake, as they I just call it. But I'll read you some of the latest findings there. They've been monitoring these things for quite some time. In 1995, some of the PCBs was 0.970. Probably it's taken from fish samples, soft tissue, and run through an ion trap, mass spectrometer, and ion and a gas chromatograph, HPLC. But then things are not getting any better. I see here their latest report as of September of 2021, 0.1940 PCBs in fish samples or aquatic samples taken from this area, which is kind of disturbing because, as you might think, there are the migration of the water is to the south. You can follow the cursor here, the south down here, from north to south and slightly east. You can see this very well. Here it does show some of those sites, monitoring well 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7. It did show up, and this is lead, and the numbers on lead, parts per micrograms per liter. Here it showed up in 1982, 655 micrograms per liter. 1984, 121 micrograms per liter. 34 for monitoring well number 4, 34, 81. So there's some variation, and then nothing, not very much shows up after that, which means to me these levels have migrated. They didn't go away on their own. And here's the slide that the Kansas Department of Health and Environment shares with us. 29th and Rowe site in the city of Wichita, the TCE, trichloroethylene contamination plume. The groundwater, again, that's migrated into residential areas. And they tell me at the meetings that there were 33 private wells that they knew of. 14 or so had been used for drinking water. The spill site, they claim from the railway, Union Pacific Railway, leaching into the groundwater and then migrating. They did remove some of the contaminated soils. City of Wichita did build a berm above the surface to keep flooding out. But the key was in the sludge pond that gave us an idea of what was going on. It would rain, and within 2 or 3 days, that rainwater would disappear, presumably leaching into the groundwater, because that pond was sitting probably at a greater depth, 14 feet, and setting right on the aquifer. And they claim that it flows south towards Murdoch Avenue. So they want to intercept this at some point between that sludge pond and the railroad tracks and presumably Avenue. Vapor intrusion is also a possibility that they announced. And again, this is their slide, KDHE's slide. Homes constructed without vapor barriers are the most vulnerable. If your home was built prior to that time, to the time when vapor barriers were to be installed, then you may be subject to vapor intrusion in basements. But of course, with central air and with other sources of moving the air around, you can get it probably throughout the house, but presumably the higher concentrations would penetrate low water areas such as basements, and flooding would be part of that. Cracks in the floors, cracks in walls, and so forth. And mind you, when these vapors come in contact with heated surfaces, say you're smoking in your basement, that is converting that vapor into a higher toxicity, furan. And who else knows? It probably wasn't that well documented as to what all was actually dumped and discarded into the John's sludge pond. Pumping and filtration of the groundwater will require years or decades of electrical energy expenditures. Here we have I think this is something I trust them on this. They said they're going to choose alternative 5, which actually grabs the groundwater, pumps it up through holding tanks and through what's called granular activated carbon. On the next slides on that. Here's what's used at Herman Hill Park currently for the Gilbert and Moseley contamination that all migrate south. Pawnee and Broadway. That's from downtown area. How many miles is that? Probably 4 miles. So this stuff does move. And that's why I indicate very strongly that the John Sludge Pond had a pH of 1, contained a lot of the alkanes, hexane, ethanes, benzenes, the aromatics, toluenes, and so forth, that allowed that material to go into solution. It changed its solubility constant, so it can penetrate soil and water volumes fairly rapidly, more so than what's been stated in these reports. But this is an aeration. This is utilizing the Venturi tube down at Herman Hill Park. This is not the best way of treating it with that's where you see the fish are in the little aquarium that they have in Herman Hill Park to use as indicators if the water is okay for those fish. And presumably they are looking at those tissues in those fish to see what those might indicate before they put that back. It actually flows right into the Arkansas River from this air stripper. And here's what they're proposing to do with the trichloroethylene up at 29th and Grove. This is activated carbon. It absorbs sorbent material, the organics primarily. Most of you might be familiar with this. It's the same kind of material you would use in an organic vapor mask or a cartridge that you would put, say, to not inhale paint fumes, or if you're working in those areas, vapors and granulated activated carbon, GAC, which I think is probably the best to date, the most cost effective. But this again requires a lot of electrical energy, just as down at Herman Hill Park does. It requires several 5 horsepower pumps, motors to run these pumps. And the expenditures on this is $14 million that they have budgeted so far. And what I'm proposing, who's got these pumps? Well, I propose that community solar and resiliency hubs supply the energy, at least the deferred capacity. What's it going to do? Build another coal plant to run these pumps to clean up material that they were responsible for putting there in the first place. PCBs are used in transformer oils, capacitors, and so forth. Currently, they use oil, but in the day they used PCBs. So here's what we're trying to emphasize in the community is planning, solar entrepreneurship, architectural, engineering, aggregation. You generate power from your rooftops, pergolas, sheds, and so forth, and sell that or run pumps and get money back for it instead of Evergy getting money back for selling the electricity to run the pumps to clean up and mitigate contamination that utilities were put there in the first place. So I'm just emphasizing the importance and what other communities are currently doing in these situations. And this is not a current date, but the put on training and education. The economic benefits provided by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Rule 2222, allows you to do that, to sell your material or excess energy on the open market through CCA, Community Choice Aggregation. You deliver that to the utility, or you contract with a customer, which we can do here in Kansas. This is a federal law, and it's part of the Inflation Reduction Act, which 40% of the Inflation Reduction Act is designated for underserved communities. It's called Justice 40. National environmental or electric vehicle infrastructure charging stations with communities and public places and schools and so forth, to put in public charging stations to make people aware. But you can charge your vehicles from home. The residential rooftops, car canopies, backyard sheds, pergolas, solar greenhouses. Here's a simple design which we need streamlined building permits for in this county. Augment the interconnection with the dominant utility in the area. This would be Evergy, which has been very, very slow and cumbersome to interconnect. Storage should be made available to those who wish to subscribe to these programs, so that you minimize peak demand, which I've always asserted that you smooth out that duck curve, that peak, that rise, that need to meet base load at certain times of the day. You can smooth that out. That's why they keep coal plants running. That's why they have to spin up fossil fuel plants to meet base load, peak demand. That's why storage can help with that. And how does that happen? Economically, the Nissan Leaf bidirectional home connection port right here and here. That's a 400-volt bidirectional charger, off-grid capability, to allowing you to run your home during peak demand time through storage, rather than a power wall that can cost tens of thousands of dollars. If you have your vehicle already equipped for this, in which I think some vehicle companies now are doing so, allow you to do this. You run your home during those peak hours, lessening your peak demand, smoothing out that duck curve at certain times of the day, and allowing you to be paid for that excess generation that you're contracted with someone for. And there it is. The Quasar 2 has just been introduced in this country, bidirectional charger. It's just a simple looking thing, looks like any kind of wall charger in the home. And the community provides the electrical power to pump the motors to treat contaminated groundwater in infected environments. You can see here, this is what's going on. These are bidirectional. These can flow. And we have that here in Wichita now. Does anybody know where? Want me to tell you where it is? The transit company, the transit authority, Wichita Transit, the bus station. They have bidirectional chargers. And we are starting to gather. Mr. Tan told me that they're starting to gather some good information off of these bidirectional chargers that they sell back to when their buses are charged or they don't need them for a while, certain evening hours and such. They will discharge back. Sundays are very good for that. Schools can do that too. Homes can be equipped with heat pumps that can heat and cool with hybrid, on-grid, off-grid, directly from or indirectly from solar or storage. These are very efficient devices. This one is at the university. The University of Wichita State is beginning. You're seeing popping up more. There's another bank over here. These are about 18,000 BTUs each. Could be a little bit more on these types, but they don't require those huge starting loads. No, there's no capacitors on those starting motors. They spin up very, very freely and use a DC inverter. So the starting loads and run times are they just run constantly when you require them. They don't cycle with those big starting loads. One thing we can do too with this electrification is declare neighborhoods to be ultra low emission zones. When more and more transit vehicles, service trucks and buses, large transports become electrified, expect to record fewer and fewer hospital emergency room visits for allergy, asthma, and heart disease, which we see now in the Northeast neighborhoods. We see some of the highest emergency room visits and admission rates due to poor air quality. And here I always have to throw this in because, you know, when we stand on street corners emphasizing electric vehicles, people shout out at us, "I'm not going to drive any kind of wussy little electric vehicle." Well, here's one example of the Bollinger. It can be used as a commercial vehicle. It can be used as a private vehicle. Encourage EV charging stations in your community. Consider the economic benefits. Study the Rowe, the return on investment from driving and riding electric. Schools, community centers, churches can all take part in this Justice 40 initiative. Green spaces instead of brownfields. Brownfields is a catchword for contaminated areas or sacrifice zones. And instead of turning a neighborhood into an industrial zone, which I think might be the motive for some of these areas, is to declare it contaminated, buy it up at a cheap price, and turn it into industrial parks, pave over it, and so forth. But I beg to differ. It can look just like this. We can have really good zones. It does not have to be a food desert. It can be a very enlightening thing. And here's something that's still illegal in Sedgwick County are windmill, even small windmills. I spread this photograph around in the Renewable Energy Conference in Manhattan in October. Still illegal. You cannot own, erect, or run one of these wind turbines in Kansas. There's no such rules. There's no exceptions. No wind turbines in Sedgwick County. And here it is. Here's the sad part. We are number 48 of all the 50 states to have clean energy policies in the state of Kansas. We can change this. This is what I'm emphasizing. And we have to ask ourselves, as far as anybody care about the climate? Yes. Is it a sunrise or a sunset for a livable planet? I always put this in here. Are we looking at a sunrise or a sunset for the planet that we live in? And with that, any questions? Don't all speak up at once.
So Kent, does the health department have anything to say about the ponds in Wichita that clearly are polluted and yet people fish in them?
Yeah, this comes from the monitoring program, analytical data. He made a presentation at one of the meetings in the Northeast neighborhood and shared the data here, which I can certainly provide you. And here are the some of the limitations of dietary intake of cancer risks. Maximum allowable meals per month, say 4 ounces of fish uncooked, 8 ounces of fish uncooked for adults, and 4 ounces for children. I don't know how it all adds up. It would be nice to know, but I did note, and please remember that what was recorded in 1995 is virtually the same levels of bees that was recorded in 2021. So something definitely is leaching, getting into this water, and impacting aquatic life that people, again, consume. And it's not necessarily the solution to pollution is not dilution. It bioaccumulates in the flesh of aquatic life. There should be some concern. Anybody else have a question?
Well, I have another question, and that is with solar panels. I assume that's what you're talking about when you're wanting to accumulate electricity and then share it later, or I guess just through this collecting electricity at night and using it during the day. Is the bus system and their sharing of energy, what does that cost? Can just consumers show up and charge their car from it, or what are the limitations there?
Well, Michael Tan told me that he's the director of Wichita Transit. So he's going to start sharing that data because COVID is supposedly over a little bit. More people the ridership is going up. They are utilizing and backfeeding into these V2G, vehicle to grid bidirectional chargers at the bus station. And they should soon have some pretty reliable data to share with us, what they can backfeed into the grid from their vehicle batteries. This has been done and being done in various parts of the country. California, notably, some parts of the East Coast. Solar for All Schools movement, certainly the school buses have the greatest amount of potential to acquire revenues through backfeeding into the grid at certain times of the day, because school buses aren't utilized all around. They're just in the mornings and in the evenings generally, and then in summers they're not utilized. I would like to see this with Stan Burkamp, who's built these pretty good sized solar array. What is that? 240 solar panels out there at Mays High School. Let's get some data going on and start the return on investments. And furthermore, First Student in Durham, I know, have a program that I brought up at the Board of Education meeting and they've applied for grants for electric school buses for this USD 259. These are the kind of things that are going to pull us out of the dilemma that we find ourselves in with our abuse of energy.
The bidirectional charging devices that you were talking about. What do those cost, and are they available for the public?
Yes, the Quasar 2 reportedly is selling for about $4,000, which I think is a bit steep. But again, if you're utilizing it in a proper way, this will pay off. Because if you can sell your power, excess power at peak demand, or you contract with someone in Arizona or back east that needs the power at that time. What was it in Houston this summer? Again, it hit the maximum. What was it? $900 per megawatt hour. That means if you sell your excess power, that's $9 per kilowatt hour that you can contract with Houston in the summer.
Goodness.
So those kind of things add up.
Well, how would that differ from a Tesla wall battery that's what, $13,000 today?
Yeah, that's what is that, a 12 or 13 kilowatt hour battery?
I don't know.
That means you could sell. Yeah, the power walls. Yeah, they had a display up at the Renewable Energy Conference in Manhattan in October. And yeah, that sells for excess of $10,000. But if you already have it in your vehicle, and your vehicle is capable of being a power wall itself, then it's called mobility as a service, as a power. The Army, the military already has been doing this for some time because of field operations. They do exercises, data centers, forward staging areas, mobile surgical units in the field, in those field operations, forward staging areas where you don't want to risk convoys of diesel trucks to feed diesel generators. So they use solar vehicle batteries and wind turbines, with small wind turbines that can be utilized in this way. I suspect that's what we should be doing in Ukraine right now, is distributing, decentralizing their power grid, because they're again targeted in the same spots, and that's not very smart, not very resilient for a power grid to be, because of natural disasters, and we've seen that here: ice storms, trees falling on long stretches of lines. So what we're doing with microgrids is pretty amazing, because it decentralizes, it democratizes, and it establishes a real nice economic opportunity for local communities that want to engage in a circular economy and return on investment in their neighborhoods. I might mention also go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you to go back to the pollution issue, contamination issue, and maybe briefly summarize what kind of interactions EPA had with the community. I know that's required, but I don't know how efficient they were, and how much they dove into the issues, whether they got community input on what the community wanted at that site once it's remediated.
Yeah, the first meeting ended, there were some pretty upset people, but there were only a few people there, and part of the reason they were upset is because they weren't informed. Second meeting, a little more, and the third meeting there were about 60 people, including civil and state elected officials, and they were not happy that they hadn't been told about this. But I know that we have two Sierra Club members here, Don and Ellie Skoken, who have been attending the ones up in the contamination up in 57th Street North and Grove region. That's another site. They had refineries. In fact, if you really want to know, there are 74 Superfund sites in this county. All but 26 have been archived. They've supposedly been mitigated, but there's still some that are active that are on the non-national priorities list, and that's the John Sludge Pond. It still has a higher priority than the archived ones. And then there are 2 that are still currently active that they're trying to mitigate. So that's where it stands. And I might mention that the Toxic Substances Control Act has rules about record keeping for utilities that dispose of PCBs. And I'm wondering if Evergy ever bothered to do that. This gets back into the Ronald Reagan era of the Environmental Protection Agency, started by Jimmy Carter, but was a complete scandal with Ann Gorsuch, mother of Neil Gorsuch at the Supreme Court, and her lieutenant, Rita Lavelle, who ended up doing jail time because of misappropriation of these funds. These funds disappeared from the Superfund cleanup efforts. And is it the public radio in Boston, WBUR something, earlier on, you archived that, had a really good radio interview with Rita Lavelle and how it all came down in those times. 40 CFR 761 part 63 does state that record keeping is required for those people who handle PCBs, the utilities, to take care of these things. That's why I see negligence here on behalf of, I guess it was what, KG&E at that time. Then it went to Westar, now it's Evergy, but it's the same lineage of utility companies. Just because you handed it over to a third or a second party, that material ended up in the environment, I don't think it absolves you from not taking responsibility for that. I put that in my report to KDHE on this.
And that's very frustrating, and especially when ownership changes, they can always claim they didn't get it or got lost, the records and transfer. But I know up here in the Olathe, Kansas area, we had a chemical plant that did also release TCE into the environment. It migrated a couple of blocks away, and it was mostly vapors that were coming into homes across the way. But they came up with a pretty good project. But again, it was initiated by the homeowners who said, this is what we need done, and this is what we want to see done with the property afterwards. And we didn't do community gardens up here, probably because of potential soil contamination, but we did pollinator gardens and created a park in the area where recreation is appropriate. So it's become quite a model project, but Region 7 does not have a good history on this kind of community involvement. It took a third party consultant that they brought in who actually led on it. So I'm frustrated. I know how frustrated it must be. I had no idea that there were that many contaminated sites in Wichita.
Yeah,
I'm not
sure
surprised, but yeah.
Yeah, that's our price of fossil fuels.
Yep.
What concerns me, and my adage is why does a utility make bank on selling electricity to run pumps to clean up water contaminants that they put in there themselves? That is I think a good case to put money in, or at least get the grant monies start model projects to add value to these areas that have been victim of redlining and urban flight. This is and there are rather new homes in there that are boarded up right in there that no one lives in, which is a shame. This could be a real good model for a microgrid, and Evergy's going to have to come around to face the facts anyway. Centralized power generation utilizing long power lines, massive structures overhead is not the answer. And we've seen that in, what was it, Lawrence and Topeka. And then we had the governor, Kelly, sign into law that any more of these big, huge 130 plus kVA lines going overhead in neighborhoods is not pretty, and it's abusive. And you cannot just come in there like that unless you get the community itself to agree, which I don't think is going to happen anymore. So anyway, anybody have any more questions? How's your holidays going? I hope you did well and things were good, but this is food for thought. This is the green news and this is the green parties. That's why I stick with them, because this is the original part of what the Green New Deal was supposed to be when it was first conceived of. And I think we should take ownership of it. And thank you for Sierra Club, Audubon Society, all the other contributing folks that should be petitioning and aligning themselves with this kind of architecture for our electric grid. And that we can do this given that we have now the Inflation Reduction Act and the monies designated for underserved communities. 40%, just as 40. That's what that means. So, all right, anybody else? Well, thanks very much. You want to bring us out? Or do I put everybody to sleep? I'll stop my screen share here. All right, kind of see everybody. Well, again, very good. If anybody has any questions, most of you know me personally, and certainly we'll be working on this and to petition for these end results on the mitigation of the Northeast groundwater contamination. So with that, well, good night, everybody. Thank
Good
you all
night,
for joining.
Kent. Thank you for doing this.
All right, hope you enjoyed it.